whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Now you see, there is no circumference to experience. It goes out indefinitely. We look out into space and wonder, where does it end? And the answer that astronomers give is sort of complicated. We think it's a kind of double talk. It's boundless and yet circular. You can represent that mathematically, but you can't imagine it in a three-dimensional image. But every being that is sensitive is a particular expression of the circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. And I think we're probably going to have to abandon the idea that there are superior and inferior expressions. As the Zen poem says, in the spring scenery, there is nothing superior, nothing inferior. Flowering branches grow naturally, some short, some long. And so it is with all the orders and species of nature and all their variations. But you see, as you watch any given species, you see, as I said, sub-variations within the species. And the more intently you watch, the more subtle they become. That is because we watch human beings intently, that we see each one of us as different, whereas all flies look the same. But to flies who watch each other intently, they all know that they're quite different. They have personalities, probably. All sorts of funny things going on. So now, I've been thus far really enlarging on what I was saying last night. But I want to continue with a very serious problem that we have arising out of our study of nature, which is related to this question of tolerance for variations. There's a famous French saying, tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner. To understand everything is to forgive everything. Because the more closely you examine the variations, the more you discover that they have a kind of inseparable relationship with each other. That you're normally looking at life, as it were, through a Venetian blind. That there are certain areas that are covered in this way that you don't think about the connections. You ignore the connections between certain events, certain things. But as you study and become more aware, the Venetian blinds are pulled up, and you see that one set of circumstances goes with another. You may say that event is absolutely deplorable and ought never to have happened. Whereas that event is just great. That's the sort of thing we want. But as you study carefully, you realize that these two are part of a total process, one aspect of which does not exist without the other aspect. And then the more you look, this doesn't become simple. You notice that this relationship way doesn't go simply, as it were, in a line between one event and another, but in a many-dimensioned network involving everything. And this, of course, this perception of the inseparable relationships of all events whatsoever is what is sometimes called cosmic consciousness or mystical experience. And I must say, it's a fascinating thing. I've recently found myself in this state of mind every morning when I wake, almost every morning. And you have an urge at that moment to get up and write. Get that thing that you saw. It was so marvelously clear. The total clarity as to what it's all about. And then suddenly you want to put it down, and you really don't know what to say. As the Chinese poet put it, picking chrysanthemums along the southern fence, gazing in silence at the eastern hills, The birds are flying home through the soft mountain air of dusk. In all these things there is a deep meaning, but when we are about to express it, we suddenly forget the words. I love to quote St. Augustine's saying, when he was asked, what is time? He said, I know what it is, but when you ask me, I don't. It's like asking, what is reality? We all know what it is. But when we think about it, we can't find the words. And therefore, there's always a good laugh in this against the mystics. You know, the sort of attitude that when William James took nitrous oxide to see whether he could get a mystical experience, he certainly did. But he made some funny remark when he came out of it, which was, it's so complicated I can't remember it. It was something like, there are no differences except differences between various kinds of difference. And of course, any logician looks at that and says, ha, the man's out of his mind. But if any of you have ever had that sort of experience, you know perfectly well what that statement makes good sense. As well as some other one person said that, well, everything in the world is the smell of burnt almonds. All this universe is the smell of burnt almonds. It's perfectly true. It's absolutely obvious. Anybody who studied Zen knows exactly what that means. It's, furthermore, if you studied Mahayana Buddhist philosophy, it's the doctrine of Jiji Muge, the mutual interpenetration of all things and events. In other words, the smell of burnt almonds implies everything else. Because every event in the universe implies all the rest, goes with all the rest. If, in other words, a specimen of something, supposing there was some other universe altogether, and into that were transported one human tooth, scientists in that other universe would study that tooth and reconstruct the environment which such a tooth would represent. And from that tooth they would eventually infer the sun, moon, and stars and all the galaxies in our universe. Just as laser beams can be used to take a tiny fragment of a photographic negative and reproduce the whole negative from which it was taken. Because every bit implies the totality. Now you see, when you feel that, you feel very funny. That's why a lot of people who take psychedelic chemicals and get experiences of that kind feel very funny. If you're not prepared for that kind of experience, it's very disorienting. Because it seems that there is no right and no wrong. Everything is okay, or everything is equally evil. And anyway, who's in charge around here? What am I supposed to do? Am I the mere puppet of fate? Or am I God? If so, that's a terrible responsibility. It really scares me. And but you see, it's perfectly obvious that anybody who experiences the world in that way is, from our ordinary social point of view, quite mad. Because we are quite sure that that is not the way things are. That there are right things and wrong things. And that you can get rid of this and preserve that and change it around so that it's much better. And that there are important things and there are unimportant things. Because we've decided that the important thing, of course, around which we really today constellate all our values, is survival. It's a good thing to go on living. Well, we could question that. When Freud's doctor suggested that he stop smoking, He died because of cancer of the mouth.